My name is Bill Marler. I'm a partner at Marler Clark, a food safety law firm based in the Northwest, and I'm the proud publisher of Food Safety News. This outbreak was figured out by the folks at Minnesota Department of Health, affectionately known as Team Diarrhea. Originally there were 5 to 6 ill people at a couple of different restaurants with E. coli 0157H7. That's a reportable bacterial infection. So once a lab comes back with that test result, they're contacted by the health department. So the health department investigates, finds out what the common denominator here is. It pretty much started to look like it was at a couple of different restaurants in the greater Minneapolis area. Unfortunately, those numbers have increased to 19. They're all linked to 2 restaurants. Hen House has a couple of them, but most of the illnesses are at a restaurant called Red Cow or restaurants called Red Cow. It's most likely that these hamburgers were undercooked. The FDA or food code says that the hamburger should be cooked to an internal temperature of 155 degrees. USDA has a little higher standard of 160. For the most part, E. coli cases linked to hamburger have been a thing of the past for the most part. It was what I did during the 90s, early 2000s. That's frankly all I did. But the industry and government, the beef industry, government, and the restaurant industry really sort of stepped up, and they were, making sure that the meat supply was freer of these pathogens, but also that the final step here was that restaurants were, cooking properly. I almost think that there's a little bit of a false sense of security at restaurants because just in the last couple of months, we've had not only this outbreak in Minnesota, but we had a deadly outbreak up in Kalispell, Montana, where 22 people were sick and 2 died. And it was from, again, undercooked. Here it was grass-fed Wagyu beef. So it can happen. It can happen. And I think restaurants need to sort of rethink their food safety protocols regarding cooking of hamburgers and cooking them thoroughly. This is not burning the hamburgers to a hockey puck. 155-degree internal temperature, will still make that burger taste great. It's just that it's going to be safer. The one thing that has happened is they were Minnesota Department of Agriculture found leftover hamburger meat that had not been used. They tested it. They found E. coli in it, and that was the same genetic fingerprint as the ill people, which is now 19. And that's prompted a recall of over 150,000 pounds of meat from a producer in Michigan called Wolverine Packing. People just need to be reminded again that even though the beef industry has done a real remarkable job of cleaning up the hamburger supply, I mean, they're doing testing of product, and a lot of the product that used to get onto the market is never making it onto the market. But, these kinds of, contamination events can happen in a slaughter facility. And so, it becomes highly important that, who's ever preparing the hamburgers, whether it be a restaurant or, you on outside cooking in, a barbecue or inside the house, you got to cook that product to an internal temperature of 155 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the thing that you can do to protect yourself. Also, in a kitchen setting, whether it's a commercial or a home, when you utilize this product, wash your hands thoroughly, wash your cutting boards thoroughly, and really, when it comes down to it, have a thermometer handy, a nice digital thermometer, to make sure that product is cooked thoroughly. I think that the industry has really done a good job, of adjusting to the fact that, in 1994, the USDA FSIS deemed E. coli 0157 an adulterant in hamburger. I think the industry has stepped up, and I think the restaurant industry on top of that, really took Jack in the Box to heart, and we're cooking these products, thoroughly. I think what we're seeing is not necessarily a failure of regulation or a failure of enforcement. It's difficult to make sure that every pound of hamburger is E. coli free. I mean, they do everything they can to do interventions. They do the testing, but testing and these interventions are not 100% foolproof. So every once in a while, there's going to be a leakage into the marketplace of E. coli contaminated product. And that's why consumers need to be aware. Restaurants need to be aware. And I think in some respects, it's a little bit like, people making decisions about, healthcare, whether it's vaccines or, whatever. If you haven't heard about a polio epidemic, for 20 years, you might say, gee, do I really need to go get a shot to prevent polio? And I think in some respects, that's what you're seeing here. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, E. coli cases linked to hamburger were, a fairly frequent occurrence, and recalls of hamburger meat because of E. coli were a really frequent occurrence. And there would be, 500,000 pounds, millions of pounds, tens of millions of pounds recalled. We just haven't seen that much in the last 20 years. And so, memories have faded. It's 31 years ago that the Jack in the Box case happened, almost 32 years ago. And, there's not a lot of people who necessarily have that institutional memory except old guys like me.